Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Power BI user group for the West Midlands. And obviously, this is the first session we've managed to have for a little while. So yeah, it's good to be back, and there's certainly been a lot of interest in this group today, and I'm sure people will be joining as we go along. What I could do though, please, is if I can ask you all to mute your mics when people are presenting. That will make it easier for the presenters. If you have questions, it's probably easier to drop those in the meeting chat, and I can then pass those on to Flavio later at the end of his presentation so he can address those. So hopefully, if this is going to behave, there we go. So we've got a little bit of news really about how we're going to be running the user group going forward, and some very brief notes on some new features that are worth highlighting in Power BI. And then we have got the main event here today is Flavio presenting on advanced visuals. So as I say, during his presentation, if you do have questions coming up, there will be time to go over some questions at the end. But if you can put those into the meeting chat, it's a lot easier to manage that rather than speaking in the middle of the presentation. We can just manage that flow of questions coming through. So it's been about it's been more than that, about 8 months now since we last had one of these sessions. We had been hoping to get back to some face-to-face stuff in the summer, but obviously that for various reasons was not possible. But in that time, probably the biggest thing we've seen occurring in Power BI is the advent of premium per user. Now, one of the big problems that we've always had with Power BI Premium is that there is a massive price barrier to running Power BI Premium. So if you need that kind of line level detail reporting that you would normally see in for Power BI tabular reports, that's been out of reach of most medium-sized companies. By using Power BI Premium, it's essentially, I think it works out about £15–18 per user per month, and it gives you all the Power BI Pro functionality, plus a whole swathe of the premium functionality as well. So you get a lot more for your money, and it flexes with the changes to the size of user base that you're working on. In the most recent release of Power BI, we have got a new format pane coming into preview. So it's they've done a lot now to group up the different elements of formatting panes and so on, so that you it's a lot easier to find your way around it, easier to find the formatting elements that you're looking for, and it takes up a lot less vertical space in your designs, so you've got a lot more screen real estate that you can use. There is also in preview, I think still, it's a new Google Sheets connector. So now you will be able to start connecting to Google Sheets if your organization uses Google Sheets as its as a spreadsheeting option. So you're not just limited to Excel spreadsheets. And there is improved page navigation coming in as well now. So there's a lot of things there that are worth looking at. Not going to be presenting anything on that today, but that is something we can probably look at in a bit more detail in a future session. And next we've got some user group news. So really for nearly 2 years, we've hardly had any events now for the obvious reasons. From January next year, we are hoping to be restarting more regular events. Now, we did do an online event earlier this year, that was fairly successful as well. Although I think the main learning we took away from that was that the sort of 2-hour format or so for the online events is excessive. So what we are planning to do is continue these sort of short form online events, which will be sort of an hour over lunchtime. And just so it would be sort of a single presentation with a bit of news. We'll cover some of the new features coming out, that sort of thing. We are hoping to actually return to in-person events from the first quarter of the next calendar year. Obviously, all the usual caveats apply to that we don't know exactly when things, and we don't know what may change between now and then. But assuming everything remains reasonably stable, we will be able to return to some form of in-person event from the first quarter of next year. I'm hoping maybe February, but we need to have that conversation with Flavio and Tobias to see when we can arrange that. But if we can get something up and running, that would be kind of our ideal. And the final bit is that we are now launching a YouTube channel for the user group as well, so that the recording and slide decks and things from here can be uploaded to there, so you'll be able to review this at your leisure. And we'll have everything there that you want, and hopefully we'll be able to get more video stuff up and running from there. So that will be coming soon. Obviously, that I will send out details along with links to the recordings on this as well. I'll send out to everyone who signed up to this event. Hopefully sometime tomorrow I'll get that out to everybody with the recording and everything. That recording link will be available for a couple of weeks, but the recording will then be put up to YouTube for the long term, so you'll be able to access that recording there. So I think that's pretty well all from me now. So at this point, I will stop sharing my screen. If I can find where the button is to stop that. No, I don't want to add more sharing stuff. Stop it.
I'll try to share, Tom. Let's see if this works.
Yeah, Flavio, if you share, that should stop me sharing.
No, actually doesn't let me, so you need to find that button.
Oh, there it is. Sorry.
Let's give that a go now.
Apologies for that, everybody. That was the fun and games of Zoom not wanting to do the things that I wanted to do sometimes.
Right, so hopefully you can see this, Tom. You can hear me well.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great, crack on then. Right, so thanks for that, Tom, and welcome everyone. So today's topic, as announced, will be advanced visuals inside Power BI. And whether you are an advanced user or if you're just starting out with the tool, this will hopefully give you 1 or 2 ideas you haven't come across before. And I hope that you get some value from this presentation. I'll try to stick to 30-35 minutes and let some time available at the end for questions. So a bit about me. My name is Flavio. I am originally from Portugal, but I've been living in Birmingham for the last 7 years. So I am a BI analyst for this company called Arup. If you're not familiar with us, we are an engineering, design, architecture company. We have offices all over the world. And I also write about Power BI on my personal blog, and that's the address there, bievolution.co.uk. And this is where I'll also upload the slides from tomorrow if you want to have access to this slide deck. It has a number of links, different things. This is where you could get them from. Finally, I'm a certified data analyst by Microsoft. That's the little logo you see there. And if you are serious about BI, this is something I really advise you to consider becoming certified. It's a great way to make your skills recognized and that others know that you are competent on the software. I also talk about how to pass the exam on my blog and how to ultimately get the badge if you want. The agenda for today will consist of these 5 points. I'll start with some background, setting the scene with regards to data visualization principles, and then we'll get to the meat of it, the tools and techniques that I think you're going to find interesting to build some advanced visuals in your reports. Right, so this page here, or this section on data visualization principles. So I thought this was important when putting the slides together, because I don't want you to take away from today that you can just start building more visuals, more advanced, more colorful. That's not going to make your reports better if you don't have the foundation set up right. So this is a vast topic, and a lot could be said about this. But to set the scene, I would point to this Microsoft ebook, which I will bring up in a second. And what this will allow you to see, actually I have it here, sorry. This will allow you to set those foundations right. And it's a very quick read, there's only 16 pages. And the sort of thing they talk about is, for example, embracing clarity. So you have on the left what you should avoid, and on the right what you could do to make your reports clear. For example, avoiding 3D shapes, making sure your charts have a title, making sure the colors have enough contrast. These are all very basic things that will make the report clearer. Then I have another section here on consistency, and this one is specifically around color consistency, so that the same entity has the same representation all the way through your reporting. And here they have another, but I think it's a very useful tool on a contrast check. So contrast is a very big thing for people with low vision or color blindness or some vision impairment. So this tool they refer to will allow you to calculate the contrast of your reports. For example, if you have a white background and your text is in black, that's going to give you a contrast ratio of 21. That's the highest it can go. But if you start to decrease the color or change the color of your text, this box here will show you a preview of how people will perceive it. And then your checks can either start to pass or fail depending on the contrast if it gets too low. Or you could have a red background and you could have a blue font, for example. That's probably a very bad idea. And as you can see, the contrast ratio is very bad and people have a hard time figuring out what you're trying to convey. So again, a useful tool to have in your toolbox to refer to. So if I come back to my slides. The next thing I will leave you with is this resource called Visual Vocabulary. And someone did a pretty good job of putting together a Power BI report with a summary of all the visuals you could use to represent data. For example, if you wanted to look at correlation of data, you would come here and you would see all the visuals or lots of the visuals that you could use to convey that information. So the scatter plot would pop to mind. That's usually what you'd want to use as a starting point, or the evolution of that, a bubble chart would also be an option. If you wanted to look at change over time, you go here to the respective folder and you'd see that a line chart would be your starting point, or an area chart, or a heat map. Again, this heat map, based on the first rule of clarity, you need to be careful because it only relies on color, and that can be hard for some people to understand. But then you have a whole range of visuals that you could use that would convey the specific story that you're trying to get across to people. This is a very useful resource. Again, the link is on the slides. And the final thing I'll leave you with on the principles, data visualization, is this website by a gentleman called Stephen Few. And Stephen Few is very well known in the analytics and data storytelling world. He has a number of books, as you can see here, and these are very well regarded. He will show you the principles and teach you the principles that you should use to do storytelling the right way. I usually like presenting this case right here on my Power BI training sessions, and where it takes a visual and it will break it apart and explain what's being done right, what's being done wrong, and it proposes a solution to fix it. So this one specifically was published on the Guardian newspaper to try and compare the UK budget deficits, which is this black box, against other big amounts. So we can compare the budget, the deficit with these other amounts. Now, Stephen Few goes on to do a very thorough analysis of this chart, and he says that the reason why this is problematic is because the author is trying to make us do area comparison. And that's something the human eye has a very hard time doing. For example, if I asked you which one is the bigger, the mortgage lending 2007 or the NHS spend, and you have a hard time just looking at the shapes. If you don't look at the numbers, it'll be very hard to understand which one is the bigger. And actually they are the same. They were just drawn in a different way, which makes it a lot harder for us to understand. There's other questions he raises about the colors and the grouping, but that will be the main point, that this chart is very hard because we're trying to compare areas, which is something the human eye has a hard time doing. What it then goes on to do is propose an alternative. And it took exactly the same data and it just built a bar chart with exactly the same numbers. And it put the budget deficit here at the very middle as this vertical line. And this allows us to answer the question that that chart was trying to answer. How does the budget deficit compare to other amounts? And you can see it's almost half of the bailout figure there at the very top. So in a second, you can answer the question the chart was supposed to answer in the first place. So again, that's a very revealing example. And then it has a background here. If you do want to read this, it's a very useful resource as well. So I'm getting back to my presentation. Right, and now we're ready to start with some more advanced techniques. The first thing I will tell you about is Python and R scripts. These are by no means new. These things have been around for quite a bit. Let me just try to remove this. I don't think this will go away, that's fine. And what you would start doing to bring Python scripts onto your Power BI report would be, first of all, to install Python on your machine. So there's a very detailed article that I link to as well that you would follow to get that installation going. It's a bit intricate, but it's very detailed. And I'm not going to go through that. I've already installed it on my machine. And after you've done that, then you can start leveraging so-called Python packages. And these packages are different pieces of code that are written in a way that you can just change variables to build whatever chart you want to build. So I'm going to be referring to a package called Seaborn, which I'm going to show you here. So this is the home page of that package. And if I go here to gallery, you'll be able to see all the different types of visuals you can build with this package. So for example, you could build heat maps, which is something that you'll not be able to build out of the box in Power BI. Or if I scroll down, you could build, I think this one is called a reach plot, and that measures change over time for categories, which again, you can do out of the box in Power BI. And the one I'm going to be explaining or showcasing to you today is this one, a joint plot. And to do that, I'm going to simply use this random piece of code they have here, which is going to generate random data for us. So I've already copied that onto the slides, which you also will be able to access if you go to the notes. And I'm just going to drop that on my Python visual. Again, you'll have to have this installed prior, which I have already done. And I'm just going to remove these strange characters. So the code itself is not really the important bits. Not like you to focus on that. It's just what it can achieve, and that's important here. The important point. So if I just run this code with random data, what I should get back is that plot we were seeing a second ago. It's an advanced scatter plot. This is how I classify it, with a histogram on each axis, which by default, again, you can do that in Power BI. But then the usefulness, if you come back here to the Seaborn package documentation, is that you can start changing these variables to suit your needs and build different types of charts. So we're looking at this hex kind of chart. If I change it to hists. It's as simple as changing this variable here, and I run it again. Then what we should see is that the chart will change and represent data in a slightly different way. So that's now more of a heat map. Or if I look at KDE, I'm going to get another way to represent the same data, which might be more appropriate. So that looks more like a topography example. So you start to see how powerful this is and how many packages you can leverage. It's just one visual inside one package, and there's, I would say, a dozen more packages you could explore to achieve this sort of visual. Right, so that's just a little introduction to Python. I didn't go over R scripts. It will be a very similar approach. And I would say you want to use one of these if you're representing statistical data. I think that's what Python and R will lend themselves to quite easily. Right, if all this coding isn't really for you and you just want something drag and drop a lot more simple, then I think Charticulator would be more interesting to you. And this is their website, and this tool is the result of a Microsoft research project. And as of a few months or weeks ago, I believe it's been made available inside Power BI. So if I look here at the gallery, you'll start to see all the different types of charts you can build inside this tool. For example, this one, again, very different, very visually striking. I would say this is a type of circular Sankey chart almost. The other thing it could do is this bump chart, I think it's called. It's very useful to show ranking evolution over time. Another example, well, you see it gets quite exotic. We're going to be building something simple in a second, but this just gives you what can be done with this tool. So what I will be building for us today is the so-called lollipop chart, which I'll try to find and show to you. So I believe that would be here on the ranking. And here we are, it shows up. So this is it. The lollipop chart is basically a bar chart with a circle at the end to draw attention to the width of the bar. So let's try to build that using this tool very quickly. So I've already went on to the App Store and got the visual. That's the first step you do to start repeating what I'm doing here. So to get more visuals, search for the tool, and then you'll be able to do what I'm doing. And I'm using dummy data. Again, a very simple example. You can see on the left what the data looks like. I have 5 countries, and then I have units sold, and I'm just going to try to represent that using this more advanced visual. So you'll go to Edit. You need to make sure that you add the fields you want to represent onto the tool. So in my case, that's country and units sold. And then you present it with these 2 options. You can either create a new chart or import a template, one of the ones I was showing you. But for now, we're going to do a new chart completely. And this is the screen you're going to be presented with. I would say there's only 3 main aspects to this. Number 1 is the chart itself here on the left-hand side. Then there is the glyph, and the glyph is the physical representation of the data. And if I show what that means, if I draw a little rectangle here, then the chart already knows I have 5 data points, so it's 1 for each country, and it's going to draw it with the shape I've put on the glyph. Or I could instead want to represent triangles, for example. So if I drop a triangle, my data would be a triangle. So that is what the glyph does. And then here at the bottom, you have attributes. So this is where we will control the color, the width, the stroke, shadows. You can then customize all those visuals through the attributes. So to build our little chart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop an horizontal line there. Now you're seeing that it's representing those on the x-axis, which is not what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the chart and say stack that vertically instead. And now you can see I have a line that's going to be a bar for each country. Now I need to find a way to say that this bar corresponds to a specific country, which I don't see there yet. And this is the usefulness of this tool starts to shine, because there's no coding involved. I can just literally grab my country, drop it on the axis, and there it is. I'll just build the legend onto the chart. I now have one bar for each country. The thing we're missing still is that these bars do not have the right width that depends on the unit sold. So I haven't passed on a parameter yet. And again, I'm just going to do the same, dragging and dropping onto the bar there. And as you can see, the bars already start to gain the right width based on the units sold by country. So what happens if I wanted to color these bars a bit differently now? So everything I need to do is, again, change the metadata based on my data, and I can just drag my country there to stroke, and you can see it already colored the bars using the theme that I'm using in my reports, all automatically without me having to specify anything else. And we are almost there. The last step would be then to add a little circle at the end, which we can do by updating the glyph with a symbol. And if I just drop that there, here we are, we have our circle. Let's say I don't like the color, so I'm going to do the same to fill by country. And now every circle has its own color, and I'm going to make this bigger. And let's say I don't like the size, I want that circle to be bigger. I'll just change it here. And let's say I want the line to be a bit wider. I'll do that here as well. Let's make it dashed. Some questionable decisions, but we've made a chart. Right, so after I'm happy with my chart, I'm going to hit save there. Again, as I mentioned, you could export these templates to be used in other visuals and other reports, but for now, I'm just going to hit save, go back. And what we've achieved in a few minutes was building a whole new chart, and bear in mind, it's a very easy one, that then is going to behave as any other Power BI chart would. So if I click one country there on my data, you can see it cross highlights, or it could filter the data directly if I had a slicer on the screen. So it's going to behave as any other chart. I will show you, though, before moving on, that you can then take this to the next level if you want. We barely scratched the surface here. So I didn't talk about scaffolds, but if I went for this circle scaffold and I dropped it there, just like that, I would create a completely different chart. This one is not built on an X and Y axis, it's a circular axis, where you then could control the radius or on the spacing between these lines. It's very, very flexible. And as you've seen, there's pretty much no coding involved at all. So pretty interesting tool, this one. All right, I'm going to save that, and I'm getting back to my slides. Right, the other technique I want to tell you about today is perhaps the one I like the most. It's SVG elements. So if you haven't come across SVG, that stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. And that's a complicated way of saying that if you draw something with SVG, you can scale that, can zoom in and out as much as you want, and that graphic will never lose resolution. So I'm going to bring this website up with an example. This is an excellent website, W3 Schools, that would teach you what SVG is and other topics, by the way, not just this. And you can actually have a go yourself at seeing how this code generates SVG elements. So the only bit we are interested in is this bit here in the middle. And I'm very simply saying I want to draw a circle with an X and Y position of 50 pixels, radius of 40 pixels, and I'm going to color that yellow inside. But if I wanted to start change these parameters, for example, let's say I want the fill to be red, and I run that again. Now I'm starting to change the properties of this visual element. And let's say I want the stroke to be black, and I want the radius to be 20. And I run this again. So I'm starting to dynamically change these parameters to be whatever I want that to be, which, as I'm going to show you in a second, can lead to very advanced scenarios. So first step will be to bring that SVG onto Power BI. So I've already shown you how I can do that in the web browser. How do I get that inside Power BI? So the first thing you'd want to do is download or go to the App Store and get this visual HTML content. This is not the only one. You could get anything that supports rendering HTML content. So you would do that and then very simply create a measure, a DAX measure. So you right click and new measure, and you literally paste the code that we were seeing on that browser, on that window. So that's exactly what I've done. And to prove that it's still working, I'm going to change the radius to 40, and I'm going to change the stroke to green, and I'm going to fill the circle as black. And this should then render exactly the chart again with my circle. Now you might be wondering, that's all well and good, but that's a very simple circle. How can this benefit my reports? So now I'm going to show you a few examples where I've used this to create some pretty interesting scenarios. So this report right here is something I've created for a Power BI competition some time ago. And the task was to start with Premier League football data and represent that in a way that anyone, even people not familiar with football, could understand that data in a visual and appealing way. And the interesting bit is this radar chart here in the middle. You can see two triangles. These are SVG elements. And I'm basically assigning a vertex to some players' performance data. So if I change the player to someone else there in the top, you can see the chart gets redrawn for that specific player using their specific data. This element here on the left showing where the player plays is also an SVG element. It is a very simple scenario after you know these basics I just told you. It's a simple triangle where the X and Y positions of the vertex are determined by the data. And then I just applied a bit of color to it, a bit of transparency, a small shadow. So it doesn't take a lot to start making a big impact on your reports. So I'll just walk you through the rest of the report very quickly. The other things you can see is the cost for that player, the evolution with time. If I go to player stats, I again try to be a bit creative with the way I was going to represent that data. So I just try to put it all, instead of on a table, I put it on a football pitch, seeing how many assists does the player have, how many goals has he scored, and if it's a goalkeeper, how many saves has that player done. And if I go here to league overview, the last tab, this will focus on value. And the value, simply put, is how well will a player perform for the money that the club has paid for the player. So in this case, this guy here was the most valuable at the time. His output was the best for the least amount of money spent. And if I wanted to look at all the stats for all the players, then I could have a look at this table, which again, I was trying to avoid some dull data, given that the audience was wanting something like this. So that's one example of what you could do. Another example would be this right here. So this report was built actually after that first one I showed you. I then did some work for an Italian startup that apply machine learning to football scouting and recruitment. And there was some Python coding, which is what you see in there, I had to do to get their algorithm, which is a proprietary algorithm, and then grab all that data and represent the squad on the pitch based on a tactical formation that the manager would choose. So you can see that as I select teams, then the players will get represented there on the pitch. And the little text and the boxes and even the players' names are all SVG elements. And the feedback we got was that people thought this was an app, not a Power BI reports. So you can actually start building really advanced things if you start bringing these basic techniques together. So it was very well received. And a final thing I'm going to show you here using SVG elements is this demo report. So this one was done for a client. I have anonymized all the data and made, well, all of it is dummy data really at this stage. And the task was to represent survey data in an engaging way for the end user. So again, a typical way to represent survey data would be a table. That would be the go-to. But we try to come up with a hybrid solution in this case, where the left-hand side is made up of SVG elements. And I'm going to show you in a second how we build that. And the right-hand side is just a simple bar chart that tries to expand on these categories, showing all the answers to the questions. And then we're just measuring how things are evolving from survey number 1 to survey number 2. In this case, the scores have gone up with this random data. Then what I can do is if I click there on that area governance, I'm just going to be drilling down onto the questions for that specific area. Or if I look at processes, this is only the questions for that process. And here at the top, I can filter by business units. So these could be departments, different departments inside the company. So if I look at unit B, the scores will be different and the SVG elements will all get redrawn for that specific selection. So what I will show you now is the Power BI report that's behind that chart I was just showing a second ago. So the interesting bit here would be how we build the actual SVG bar. And I've tried to make the code as dynamic as possible, because you've seen how I could change that circle parameters a second ago. So I've done the same here. So for example, the bar height is a number that I can choose and it will affect all the bars. So if I wanted to change the height from 80 to 70 pixels, that will think for a second, and then you should see the bars shrinking a little bit. It's taking a second. And here we are. The bars have been made smaller now. So I'll put that back to 80. And I've done the same with the bar width and with the overall SVG dimensions. But the interesting bit is actually the bar itself. So I'm going to show you the code that generates that first blue bar. And it looks more intimidating than it really is. We're only doing really 2 or 3 things with all this text. So at the very top, I'm just defining overall variables like the color of the bar. So if I wanted to change the color to be white at the start, I could just change that right there. And if I look at the results, then that becomes a gradient from white to blue again. Not the best choice, but just a demonstration. Then I'm just taking that color that I've defined manually. I can make that be whatever I want, and I'm just feeding this to the gradient here at this very stage. So you would not need to know this sort of thing by heart. I certainly don't. So if you Google SVG gradient, this is going to be the first results that you're going to get. And then the challenge is to tweak the general code a little bit to suit your needs. And then, for example, you can feed whatever colors you want to those gradients and make the process fully automated. The interesting bit, though, is this one right here. So these points are actually what's drawing the bar itself. I'm just providing the X and Y coordinates of 6 points, which are coming up with the bar. So for example, if I changed the coordinates of point number 2 by 100 pixels, you will see straight away what happens. And here it is. So I'm starting to change the shape of this bar. And if I now change point number 5, which is this by the same amount, and I go back to the chart, you will see I'm drawing a weird shape, but I'm changing dynamically, because you could then make this be be a function of the score. You could change the shape and you can draw pretty much anything you can think of just using this SVG technique. So something I really like. I'll just say there's a little thing to bear in mind, which is performance. So that's something I was happy doing in this report right here, because the amount of data was quite small. But if performance is a problem, then you need to have a think. We can discuss if there's any questions on this, how to make this SVG not affect the performance of the overall reports. Right, I will wrap up after this slide to give some time for questions. But the last thing I will bring up is the Power BI SDK, and SDK stands for Software Development Kit. So if after everything you've seen, you still have a specific need that you haven't been able to address yet, then you might want to consider the SDK. And what this is the ability for you to take the tools Microsoft provides to basically build custom visuals. And this is the same tools that people who build visuals for the App Store can then download the third-party visuals. This is exactly what they use to build those visuals. So I'm not going to lie, this is heavy on the code side. You need to be pretty comfortable with coding things. If you want to go down this road, I actually recommend a channel on YouTube by a gentleman. I believe his name is Ted Paddison. And Ted does a very good job of explaining how to do all this. It starts with this guide, and he explains how to then develop a pipeline of reports using these tools. That's not something I have done personally, but again, I thought for completeness, it would be important to mention that this exists if you want to go then to that more professional route. Right, that is all I wanted to cover. This is where you can find me, LinkedIn, email, or on the website, where you'll be able to find the slides from tomorrow. So, thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Not sure if there's any questions, Tom.
Nothing's on the chat at the minute. I probably do have a question about the Charticulator piece.
Mm-hmm.
Because that looked a lot like that was essentially acting as a wrapper around some D3JS type visuals. Yeah, because previously the only way to get D3JS stuff into Power BI was through wrapping custom visuals around that stuff. So I take it this is a way of getting a lot more of that D3JS functionality into your Power BI reports a bit more painlessly.
You're right. Yeah. So if I come back to the SDK I was speaking there last, this is a D3 element builder basically, and I would say that the tool, this one here, Charticulator, it's basically a way to make that easier. We just drag and drop experiences, as you were saying. So I think most people would be happy just working with this tool, unless they have such complicated requirements that they need then a very bespoke visual. That would require some coding. Yeah, so this makes it accessible for everyone to build a custom visual without having to know any code prior.
Yeah, I think as well that being able to get these out of sort of custom visuals off the shelf, it's a lot safer than building your own visuals around it, and you're likely to hit fewer performance issues, I would have thought, as a result of that. Just had a question come through asking, can you export the D3 code out of Charticulator?
That is a good question. Let's have a look. What I know you can do for sure is export the template, which I believe you can do there. All right, apparently I can't. But this would be the way to make this a usable template. I'm assuming, depending on the format we get, you could then look at the code. If you open it up with Visual Studio Code or some equivalent tool. So I believe that would be the way to go.
Yes, I think that's a bit of a maybe not.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if the D3 code itself was actually hidden away.
Right.
Purely because it drives you towards staying within that Charticulator ecosystem rather than going off and spinning up your own stuff off it. But you never know. Sometimes you get lucky with these things. So yeah, it's worth a shot. Export it. Try opening it with a couple of tools.
Yeah.
The other thing that certainly might work with it is changing the extent. If you export it, you might be able to change the extension to .zip, because sometimes that opens up a whole load of information in things.
That's right. Yeah, same as we do with a Power BI file. Yeah, change the extension, then you might be able to hack it. Yeah, bear in mind that's probably not going to be supported, and you might lose what you have there. So it's something to do with some care.
Yeah, the supportability of some of these techniques is just because it's possible doesn't mean it's a good idea.
That's right.
Any questions from anyone else?
I'm seeing some activity there in the chat. I have not been keeping an eye out.
Few bits of thanks. Actually, just the one question at the minute from there at the moment. So. Okay. Right. Tobias just asked, will Charticulator visuals be exported to PDF?
Interesting. Let's have a look. So if I export to
I'm
PDF.
assuming so, but it's this is where it says that downloads have been blocked.
So let's see what it will do. So Python definitely does. That's good to know. Yep, it will come through. Yeah, I think our first idea would be trying to avoid the PDFing, but I do realize some clients do have specific needs where the PDF could be used. We usually try to explore, can you use the report? Can you leverage the report in first instance? And then if you can't, then exporting could be a way to go. So that will work if that needs to be done. Everyone has that client, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's also, I mean, it's always worth noting as well that first port of call with any of these things ought to be the standard visuals, because they tend to be, well, they're likely to be more universally applicable. They are likely to work faster. The more custom stuff you have to put in, the more problems you are stacking up for yourself down the line. However, we all know that that's often not avoidable. So, yeah. Can a question just come up now? Can any of the tools you've come across plot polygons or shape files and not just point data?
Right. So some of the examples I was showing here was like actually drawing shapes, in this case a triangle, so that one right there. So I was drawing a triangle. You could make very complex shapes with as many coordinates as you wanted. So those, if that's what you mean by polygons, then yes, you could come up with your own.
I think, Rina, if you want to unmute, I think the question you're possibly asking there is more along the lines of if you've got data containing actual polygons rather than
geospatial data.
Right, I see. Yep, like GeoJSON and the likes. To be honest, I have not tried it. That's a very good question to use inside this Microsoft new tool. So if I have a look here, I don't see geospatial examples there. So that is a very good question.
I think possibly the tool that might be worth taking a look at would be some of the ArcGIS mapping.
Yeah.
Because you might be able to push it into an overlay on ArcGIS.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you didn't have, like, you have to install a plugin onto the ArcGIS platform to get Power BI to connect to it. And if that plugin isn't installed, then it's just limits you of what you can do geospatially in the Power BI itself, I think.
Yeah, I think you probably are going to be a little bit limited on what you can achieve, but yeah, I think you're using.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just thought if you knew off the top of your head, no worries.
Hassan has just commented to say the SVG allows to draw polygons using the path directive, but again, I think that may not take the data type, Rina, that you're after sending in. I think I know what you're trying to do here is essentially you've got something that describes a shape in a either geographic or a geospatial data type in your database, and you'd like to plot that.
Yeah, like in Tableau, you can really easily, like, it'll import shape files for you, but for Power BI, you have to convert your shape file to GeoJSON and then to some other JSON format that Power BI will interpret. And then even when you do that, for some reason, I could never get it to recognize the JSON that it was converted to. I can get, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one I bet that you could do it with though is probably Python.
Yeah, I was thinking the
because
same.
I reckon there's a library for Python that will do that for you. So
Okay.
you could then kick that data into a Python visual and do it that way. I think that's probably going to be your best bet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, using the Python route, just the only thing to consider is you're limited to 150,000 points. So if you're dealing with pretty big data sets, that might be a limitation. And then if using things like publish to web, like the publishing that doesn't need authentication, I don't think this will work. So on the Microsoft website, there's going to be a number of limitations that the Python will have.
I think if you're throwing geodata at it, then I think if you're trying to plot over 150,000 shapes on one screen, it might be a problem anyway.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it might be a good idea to roll them up first.
It just turns your whole screen black because it's just colored it all in.
Thanks.
Okay, any more? Okay, well, I think that's looks like it's probably about it. So I'll stop the recording and